and I'm the Director of Athlete Marketing and Promotions for the Women's Sports Foundation in New York. Lisa is smiling. Thank you, Lisa. A little background of what I do, just a little bit, because my bio, I think, is in the program. But for the last 14 or 15 years, I've been working with the foundation dealing with elite world-class champion Olympic athletes, female athletes, and dealing with them with regards to their activities with the Women's Sports Foundation, our projects, our events, and also working with them with regards to our corporate sponsors, getting them endorsements and negotiating contracts in some cases, and pretty much working with them in every way possible, just as an agent would do, although we don't use that word at the foundation. But I work very closely with them. And one of the things that I've noticed in listening to the panel this morning was I feel a little kind of cocooned because of what I do. Because what I do, I deal with the elite athletes, female athletes, and not so much with the high school and college athletes, although the foundation itself works with all groups, all athletes, all female athletes in all levels, and all sports. That's why I could relate very well with what Helen said about making sure that we don't forget about the other, say, 95 or 100 sports out there that athletes participate in, and that we include these athletes and these sports when we are working to change the world. So that was very important. We have an incredible panel here. I've met with them over the last week or so via phone. I feel as if I know them. They've become my best friends. And I'm sure that what they have to present to you with regards to their own experiences, Robin and Dora, the research that Peter has done, and Pat, you've already heard the wonderful experience and background that she has to offer. The foundation itself has done what it can to address this issue in a number of different ways. Helen mentioned our project to eliminate homophobia, that it takes a team. Lisa, please stand up. Lisa Thompson is our executive director. She has been instrumental in getting this project promoted nationwide, and we are very delighted that we have her as our point person. The video and project will be presented next week at the WNBCA Final Four Conference. So, and it's taken a number of years to get on that agenda, and we're very proud that we've been able to do that. We also worked with Dee Mosbacher a few years back. I don't know how many of you know her, but she did that wonderful film dealing with women in sports. And she worked with us, me in particular, again, because I deal with the athletes, and getting some elite athletes to participate in this effort. And of course, it was very difficult to do, as you can imagine. But we were happy that Chris Everett agreed to do that. And we're happy that Zena Garrison agreed to do that, because they knew it was important to have a face of those folks who are allies. And Pat's going to talk about the importance of allies in a few minutes. But the issue is role models. The issue is having people who are not afraid to come out and say, well, you know what? I want you to be able to have the advantages that maybe I didn't have, but I know are out there. I was at a conference 2 weeks ago in Morocco. It was presented by the IOC. And I was amazed to see that role model was on the agenda as being a worldwide issue. You know, 15 years ago was just getting women athletes visible and getting them out there, getting them presented, having their sport recognized. Now, luckily and thankfully, these athletes are saying, you know what, we have to pass the torch. And the World Forum now realizes the importance and the value of female athletes, so much so that they put it on the agenda of the IOC. So we need role models for female athletes. We need role models for lesbian athletes. We need role models all over. And the panel here is going to talk about their experiences. I'm going to start with Robin. Robin is a director of operations for NCLR. And she will speak about her experience of being a woman, an Asian woman in a white elite sport of rowing, and how she broke the stereotype. And next we're going to hear from Dora. Dora is a licensed attorney in California. She will speak as an athlete in college. I have to add this. She was one of the 15 greatest players in UCLA women's basketball. And she's going to talk about the problems that she had with the whole race and lesbian issue in college and being a spectacular All-American basketball player. Peter Roby is the director of Northeastern University Center for the Study of Sport and Society. And Peter will speak about research that has been done on girls of color ages 8 through 18 in the Boston area and their participation in physical education or non-participation and why, and about how important it is for them to have lesbian role models for them to feel safe in getting involved in the sport. Pat Griffin, you've already heard from. And I kind of asked her to give up what little time she might have had this weekend to help us out, to kind of balance our panel here a bit. And she's going to talk about the important issue of having allies. And she brought it out a little bit earlier in her panel about how it's important that not only that we have allies, but the allies understand the issues and understand them well enough to be able to be productive and to be helpful. So that's our panel. And I'm going to start with Robin.
Hello, everyone. I went to Mills College, which is a women's college on the West Coast in California. And this school had many out lesbian and bisexual athletes, coaches. Our athletic director was out lesbian at the time. So for me, it was a really safe environment to be out. And my issues don't really stem from or issues while I wrote didn't stem from my sexual orientation identity so much as my racial and ethnic identity. As Yolanda mentioned, crew is a sport that is predominantly elite, white, filled with men, tall men and women, and I really didn't see myself represented in any of the video images that we saw when we trained. I didn't see myself, I mean myself as an Asian American person, as someone who is not very tall, my body appearance. In, like I said, media images, when I rode at other schools, I didn't see other Asian athletes. I just didn't see myself reflected. And I also feel that rowing is somewhat of an unusual sport. I know that all team sports really foster a team environment, but it's a sport where everyone needs to be synchronized. I often heard 8 rowers as one. It really encourages uniformity. And I felt that that uniformity not only was present in the boat, in our gesture, in our action, in our movement, but really in our appearance, our identity, in everything. If you look at footage of sort of the silhouette of Olympic boats, I mean, everyone looks the same. You saw our novice team, there are varying head heights, various body types represented. So it was really difficult to even conceptualize myself as a rower or even athlete. Fortunately, my novice team and my novice coach were really sympathetic and really supportive. We had a really large, diverse team, all different types of women, different types of bodies, ethnicities, races, sexual orientation, etc., and gender expression. So I was really comfortable in that team setting, and my coach made a point of taking me aside and saying, you have the right to claim rower as an identity. You have the right to claim athlete as an identity, because I really struggled with that. And in addition, I felt that, when I went to outside competitions, people often assume that I was a coxswain, not a rower. And the coxswain is the person that steers the boat from the back. It's usually very tiny, very petite, provides an important function on the crew team, but it's not a rower. And so while I was inside very insecure about myself and my identity as a rower and an athlete, I was constantly having to assert myself and say, no, I'm a rower, I'm not a coxswain. By the time I moved up to varsity, the team had really whittled itself down to about 10 folk, and the diversity that I had seen in my novice year was almost non-existent. There was one other Asian American woman on the team with me, and I felt that when we talked about, the sport we talked about, when we had discussions as a team, anything else besides rowing was extraneous. So I didn't feel like we could talk about, some of the issues that we had, some of the issues that I was facing, as an Asian American person, some of the insecurities that I had, all of it was rowing. And so while I don't feel like there was necessarily racist behavior, I do feel that I was silenced, I felt invisible, and due to other team dynamics, I had a really difficult year, and I ended up leaving before the end of my second year because of differences that couldn't be reconciled, and a coach that was really paralyzed in dealing with difficult team dynamics. So by the time she brought in a facilitator, there was too much hostility, there was too much division, and it was pointless. On the flip side, I also have my sort of Asian American community that I, go back to and represent. And specifically my mother, I'm actually biracial. I'm half Thai, half Polish American. My mother's Thai. And just that extended network and that extended family community. And I was not accepted as a rower. I was not accepted as an athlete due to standards and societal roles of women. Having just returned from Thailand 2 days ago, I was reminded of how a woman should be, how a woman should act, and how a woman should appear. And those standards really are, very feminine, ladylike, as my mom used to tell me all the time, very petite, very small, very diminutive, which is pretty much counter to what I wanted to be as a rower, as an athlete. And so I didn't really receive support from my mom in terms of doing crew. I was told I was fat. So it was just a really difficult balance, and I felt like, I'm presenting, sort of one image of myself. I'm to assert myself as an athlete to various rowers and other teams, but inside I'm really insecure, don't feel like I can claim that identity, and then to my mother I'm having to, sort of downplay my athleticism, and it was very, very difficult to negotiate. And I was trying to brainstorm and think of sort of something positive or, informational or words of advice or wisdom that I can give to other Asian American women that are dealing with similar issues. And I really, I don't know if I've ever really negotiated that territory successfully. And so I just share my experience, of course, open it up to questions and comments and of the like. So.
Thank you, Robin. Dora?
I'm skipping over Peter on purpose, and he knows that.
Good afternoon, and thank you. My name is Dora Dome, and as Yolanda mentioned, I was a basketball player for UCLA. And the main reason that I wanted to come and speak on this panel was to really emphasize to this group, because we are the group that are going to make change, the importance of the intersection of race with our issues around homosexuality. And I think it's really important because I think there really is a difference between the way white folks and the way people of color experience prejudice. And I think that to the extent that a lot of the movement around kind of increasing the awareness around sexuality has been led by white folks, that it while extremely important, it's not necessarily inclusive of all the experiences of people who are homosexual have, particularly people of color. And that the whole kind of idea of, when, I'm going to share a story, but I guess kind of to lay it out before, I think one of the important things to kind of understand when we go out, when white folks go out into communities talking about homosexuality, be aware that as still speaking from a place of privilege, and that it's really important to recognize that that privilege still exists, even though you may feel discriminated against because of your sexual orientation, that is something that may not be prevalent for you, but there's still a place of privilege, and the ability to be able to get up and even have an audience is a result of your society. that there are a lot of people of color who don't have that as an option, don't have the forum to go out and do that. So for me, it's been interesting. It's kind of evolving about what I was going to do. And I some aspects they were. I did experience discrimination around my sexuality. I was open coming into college. I was out since I was 16. I didn't go around bragging about it, but I didn't hide it. If anyone talked about it or made a reference to my boyfriend, I corrected them. And my discrimination have any issues around race with my teammates, but that's not surprising playing basketball. I mean, we had a fairly diverse team. But it was this uncomfortableness about, patting them on the butt when they did a good play. Like, am I making a pass at them? And at one point, my coaches actually pulled me aside and quasi-accused me, quasi-asked me if I was making passes at all on my teammates. Like, you've got to be kidding. I mean, and because they didn't know how to deal with it. And so rather than having a team forum, because, I'm like, my response back to them was, do you not see me in practice every day? You tell me, do you think that I'm making inappropriate? And why are you pulling me aside, to kind of reinforce their kind of prejudices and making me feel like I'm the one who's doing something wrong? But what it did is, like, I felt good about my response and their response to that, which was they basically just kind of let it drop. In the sense that they didn't continue to push that issue with me. But what it did for me was it really forced me to withdraw from my team, and withdraw from my coaches. And I think it totally changed my college experience, because after my first semester, I moved off campus. Not formally, they wouldn't allow me to, but I moved all my stuff out of the dorm and I moved back home, because I'm like, I'm not going to deal with these people. And it affected my ability to maintain relationships with my teammates that were more than just playing basketball. So personal relationships. And I think that was a loss for me, in going through my college career and not really being able to develop meaningful, long-lasting relationships. The race piece, again, this is how it gets complicated, because I'm not only dealing with discrimination from a sexual orientation issue, but the discrimination that I faced around race actually did come from my coaches. Some was overt, in the sense of, I had to beat the white girls when we were running lines. Like, why? If it's a timed exercise, why do I have to be first, because I'm black? Or I would get pulled out of games because a white girl beat me baseline. I'm like, well, that makes no sense, And then in other subtle ways that it came up, which I'm sure the coaches were totally unaware of and that they were doing this, but my coach was big into Scrabble. That was like her big thing. And when we went on road trips, she'd bring her Scrabble board. She would go around and ask every white player to play Scrabble, and she wouldn't ask the black players. And it was like, at one point, one of the students said, what, black folks can't spell? I mean, that was kind of her response. And, the coach, and she said it loud enough for the coach to hear, and the coach just kind of like, and walked away and didn't even address it. But, that's how it felt. Like we were not good enough to be incorporated or included in her game of Scrabble. And then I guess the last example would be that I came into UCLA having grown up pretty much on my own with my sister, my twin, and we had lived on our own since we were 16. And they were concerned about that, and I'm not exactly sure why, because clearly I did everything I needed to do to get into school. I made the grades, I got a scholarship. I did well on my SATs. Yet when I did the pre-testing to figure out where I was placed, I tested to get into all the regular classes. Yet they put me in the pre-calculus class, put me in the pre-English class, even though I tested into these other classes. Because I was, this underprivileged black athlete, and they were concerned about my ability to do well in the school. They insisted that all athletes had to take tutoring, have tutoring for all their courses, which consisted of 2 hours for every 1 hour for every class. I had 6 hours of English tutoring a week. And I'm like, I'm pretty articulate, and I have been pretty much my entire life. So it wasn't like I was walking and unable to speak. But they filled my schedule so much to take away any kind of option of choice. Like, they felt like they had to control me, to protect me, from what? I have no idea. But, those are all for me. There was no other athlete on the team that went through that. But I was also the only black athlete that came in that year. And of the 4 freshmen, I was the only one who had this incredible schedule. So, we're up in the morning, we're, weight training, classes, tutoring all day, basketball practice, more tutoring, in the evening. And it was ridiculous. It was all because of their preconceived ideas about who I was as a black person, as a lesbian on this team. So, again, I guess I put out to you that when you're having these discussions and having conversations about discrimination, that it really does look different, who you're talking to, and not to assume that everyone experiences discrimination the same, because we don't. And so that's, I guess, what I wanted to put out for today.
Thank you, Yolanda, and thanks to everybody for organizing this terrific conference again this year. We were lucky enough to participate last year from Sport and Society. A number of us participated, and we were excited when Mac and the folks from the association came to us and asked us if we would be a partner, and we said we would, and we're hopeful of staying involved. I'm especially pleased to be on this panel, especially given the presentations that you just heard, because I think there's a lot of connection between the work that we do at Sport Society, the information that we found to be true with regard to young people participating in sport, and then just reaffirming why it's so important that we work collectively to educate people about the issues, given the 2 examples that we just heard from Robin and Dora. Sport and Society has been around for 20 years. It's an organization that was founded with the idea that sport played a special role in our society and that it could be a vehicle for creating social change. And so for the last 20 years, Sport and Society has been developing programs that might offer solutions to some issues in society. And so we offer programs like Project Teamwork, which is a diversity and conflict resolution training program for middle schools and high schools. We offer MVP, which is our Mentors in Violence Prevention training program, which is a gender violence prevention training program that's offered in the high schools, on college campuses, and to professional sports teams. And we also have a program called our Urban Youth Sports Program, which was founded in order to research what some of the barriers were to why kids in urban environments weren't participating as much in sport as their peers in the suburbs. And what we found in a collaboration with the Harvard Prevention Research Center at the Harvard School of Public Health, in collaboration with Sport and Society and other community-based organizations, we found that kids in urban Boston were participating at about a 30% rate in terms of opportunity in youth sports, compared to over 70% of their suburban peers. And there are certainly a number of reasons for that. Safety was one, parental involvement was another, volunteer involvement was a third, lack of facilities was another, transportation is one of the major barriers to kids participating in sport. Well, of that 30% number, it's as much for girls in urban environments. And so when you consider that the majority of the kids living in an urban environment are kids of color, and that only 15% of the girls in an urban environment are participating in sport and physical activity, you can see that you have a real issue. For a number of different reasons. Those of us that have made our work or avocation out of sport understand the value that's inherent in sport when done appropriately. It can be a nurturing environment. It can be a terrific educational experience. and in some cases could even lead to people having a chance to further their educational career as a result of their athletic ability. Well, there's some interesting statistics that go along with that. And, certainly the Women's Sports Foundation has been on the cutting edge of trying to provide more opportunities for women to participate in sport. And Title IX has been a huge vehicle for making those opportunities more readily available. But some of the information is that even though we've made tremendous progress in regards to girls participating in sport, women participating in sport, there is a clustering that goes on in sport, especially in the NCAA, where the sports that have the majority of the athletes of color for women is in basketball and track and field. And there's obvious reasons for that. Those are the ones they get most readily exposed to. So in Robin's case, how many kids of color, especially those in an urban environment, are going to have the opportunity to participate in rowing? Not that many. We're lucky enough to have G-Row here in Boston that provides an opportunity for girls in urban settings to participate in rowing. So, we have this opportunity that presents itself for people to really benefit. But we also know that there's some realities in regards to the statistics for participation. So part of what we've done at Sport and Society is try to create opportunities more readily for kids in urban Boston, and especially for girls. So now that brings me to what you heard from both Robin and Dora, and that is, where's the role modeling for young girls who might be a lesbian? So we already know that there's fewer opportunities out there for girls to participate, and we know that there are less girls of color participating fundamentally anyway, and then you put on top of that the social construct and the stigma around either females being athletic or females of color being gay and lesbian, you really got an issue there. You got a role modeling issue. Because for those athletes who are women that are lesbian but that are not open, then the girls that we're talking about don't have easy access to that role model. Because society has created a situation where those women don't feel comfortable enough, safe enough to come out. And then in the situation where you do have women that have made the decision to come out, who are lesbian, and women of color, there are opportunities for them to be role models for young girls, but their experiences aren't necessarily all that positive. How interested are they going to be talking those young girls into wanting to pursue what they pursue? That's a question. Then, what it says to me is how important education for adults that work with young people really is. And the work that we do in diversity and conflict resolution, one of the commitments that we've made to the work that we do around urban sports is to educate coaches through workshops and clinics in areas of diversity and inclusion. Typically when you think about a coach's clinic, it's about skill development, teaching coaches how to teach a particular skill to a kid, how to run a practice effectively so you can keep the kids engaged. But think about all the social dynamic that's going on the team, and you have people that in most cases are well-intentioned, but they're usually volunteers. And what kind of skills do they have about inclusion and diversity and appreciating difference? Almost none. As it comes to working with young kids, 7, 8, 9, and 10-year-olds who are looking for an adult to show them how best to act, or show them that there is something for them, to show them a role model. So, one of the things I love about coming to these kinds of conferences is how much it reinvigorates my resolve, our work that we do, to be able to hear from people like the folks we just heard from and say, we thought we were doing the right thing before. Now I know we're doing the right thing. And so here we have a situation where parents put their trust in adults that work with them in terms of educating them. We have 2 examples of women participating at a fairly high level in regards to sport participation. At the collegiate level, where the adults in their lives were supposed to be professionals, trained to handle those situations. And they failed them both. Because they weren't equipped or they weren't open-minded enough to see the world in a different way. So what in the heck must be going on at the level of volunteer, where it's just parents, where it's just people wanting to do the right thing? You know, I mean, it's kind of scary. It's kind of scary. So, provide a safe and nurturing environment for young people. Young people need the right kind of role model. They need to know that that opportunity is there for them. The adults in our children's lives need to be equipped with the skills to deal with issues around diversity and inclusion, not just racial, not just religious, but in terms of sexual orientation. And they're very ill-equipped for that. We all know that because we have to live it in one way or another, whether we're on the side of advocating or we're on it's in a personal situation where we're living it day to day. So.
Thank you, Peter. Pat?
I wanted to start by telling you two stories about two short stories about two workshops that I went to probably about 25 years ago. They were the first times I ever went to a racism workshop. And the first time, one of the activities that the leaders had us do was to circle different adjectives that we felt described us. And so, you know, I circled things like, oh, good sense of humor, you know, fun, friendly, stuff like that. And then they asked us to do the same thing again, but they asked the white people in the group. Actually, it was all white people in the workshop. They asked us to describe ourselves as white people. And that really stopped me because I don't think I had ever really thought about myself as a white person before. I mean, I knew I was a white person, but I had never really thought about what it meant, you know, to think about myself as a white person. And I didn't know what to circle. And that was true for a lot of other people that were in the workshop too, that we were all sort of stumped because we didn't have to think about ourselves as white people. And then the other workshop that I went to not too long after that, this sort of reveals me as a slow learner, I think, but that's the way it was. But it was another workshop, and this was a mixed workshop. There were women of color and white women in this workshop. And the leaders made it really clear from the outset that it was not their role as women of color to teach the white women about racism. And I was sort of surprised and shocked by that because I thought, well, surely that's what the purpose of this is that they know about this, so they're going to teach us. And not only that, but I realized that another assumption I had was that they were going to teach us about racism by telling us the terrible things that had happened to them as a result of racism. And although I think that's an important thing for us as white people to know, it's an incomplete part of the story. Because the part that they did start teaching us, which was completely mind-shifting for me. You talk about those moments there, like the click moments, the aha moments in your life. What they taught us was how racism benefited white people. I mean, me personally, they really made us grapple with how it wasn't just about how racism disadvantaged people of color. It was about how I benefited from it. Me, who thought of myself as a good person, you know, a person who didn't agree with racism, who wanted racism to stop. And now, despite all that, every day, everything I did, I was benefiting from a system of racism. Beverly Tatum defines racism as a system of advantage based on race. And that little shift, you know, of thinking about it as not just a system of disadvantage, but to thinking about it as a system of advantage was huge for me as a white person. And so it made me think that, you know, I realized that all I had to do, it was nothing to let racism continue as a white person. And that all I had to do was nothing to benefit from it. And so, I mean, it really rocked my world. I mean, sort of changed all the way I thought about myself as a person in the world, a good person, a person. And so I guess, what I would like to do with the few minutes that I have is just to talk a little bit about some of the assumptions and actions related specific to being a member of a lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender sports movement that I think perpetuate racism by us, white people, good white people who care about social justice. Whether we want to or not, just to help us sort of name some of those things that possibly happen. One is when we sponsor a conference that's focused on, this conference is focused on LGBT, I almost hesitate to say T because we aren't really talking about that issue much, but that's the focus of our conference. And we look around, and I remember last year at this conference, we were doing a panel on the It Takes a Team kit, and we had two women on our panel who were in the video, who are two black women. And right before the panel started, one of them wrote a note and passed it, over one of us who was white to the other woman on the panel who was black, and she said, "Are we the only two black women at this conference?" And I suppose I noticed that there were a few people of color there, but, I had the luxury of being at this conference, sort of walking into rooms, seeing people that were pretty much like me, at least in terms of racial identity. So it didn't have the same kind of salience to me. But when I saw that note get passed across, it was one of the assumptions that I made. Spoke to this really eloquently. The assumption that sometimes we make as white people, that people of color will experience heterosexism and homophobia the same way that we do, and how so true that is when you think about the complications and the mix of racial identity in the picture. I mean, it isn't the same. And we can't assume that there are the same priorities placed on how we address heterosexism and racism, because race is such a salient issue that we can't ignore. I think we can't even assume the same commitment to addressing heterosexism and homophobia, because there are so many other complicating issues that are involved. One of the other assumptions I think sometimes we make when we're in the majority is that when people in the minority, in the case talking about people of color, when they bring up an issue, maybe it's about how many people of color there are at this conference, or a language that we use that's exclusive or something, I think there's a tendency for us to be defensive about it and say, oh, well, they're overblowing this issue. It's not that big a deal. We have to watch out that for ourselves. Even the language that we use. I've been taught by some of my grad students of color who don't identify. Even the very terms, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, lots of people of color don't relate to those terms. That some prefer same-gender loving, or two-spirit in the case of some Native American communities. So even the very language that we use that we think everybody sort of accepts, not necessarily. I think sometimes we appropriate the language of the Black civil rights movement in particular and use that model for ourselves without having, at the same time, done our own work around racism in our movement. And then we can't understand it why people of color get upset with us, as a community of white, gay, lesbian, and bisexual people. And all of this stuff is related to the concept that Dora talked about, white privilege. It's an invisible thing that we carry around with us. I kind of think of it, since I've gotten uncomfortable with it, is like a big wad of bubble gum stuck to my bottom of my shoe that it's really hard to get off. We walk around with it all the time. So that, and it manifests itself in such day-to-day things. Even the idea that we can sit in a conference and devote our attention to the GLB portion of the content and not be distracted by feeling like we're invisible, which I'm sure that some folks of color in conferences like this might feel. That takes energy to be angry about that and to figure out how you're going to address it. Are you going to be quiet about it, just let it go? Are you going to speak up? That takes energy that distracts from what we can bring to the table. And that's a privilege that those of us who are white have at a conference like this. Safety in terms of expressing our opinions, feeling like we don't have to, when we're in the minority, we don't have to represent our people when we speak. All those kinds of things are privileges that we have when we're in the majority. So I'm going to stop talking right now, but I feel like the thing that I strive for, and not always perfectly because it's hard to do, this is so in us, we grew up with this, is to be a white ally. And what that means to me is someone a white person who believes that racism is wrong, but not just because it disadvantages people of color, but because it has negative effects on me, too, as a white person. It deprives me of relationships and resources, and it deprives our movement of the richness that our movement deserves to have. Our GLBT, gender-loving, two-spirit, and many of the other names that I don't know. It deprives us of a multi-issue movement that welcome. As for us all to and to contribute.
Pat, thank you very much. We have maybe about 26 minutes left of this panel, and I want to make sure that we get input from the audience. So I am going to turn it over to the audience for questions, statements, affirmations, denials, whatever you want to. Yes. Peter, before you answer that, I'm going to make this mic available for folks to come up and use so we can all hear you, okay?
Well, I think there's certainly issues around inclusion that have to do with socioeconomic wherewithal. We see that as a function of some of the reasons why there's not a higher participatory rate with regard to kids maybe in an urban setting versus suburban. One of the things that we worry about a lot now with regard to that issue that you're speaking to is all the fees that are associated with participation in schools, all the travel teams that are allowing kids to further develop their skills as an athlete separate from their school participation in sports and physical activity. They all require a fairly healthy amount of money. If you want to play on a travel soccer team, it's $400 or $500 or $600. Hockey, forget about it, with all the ice time and the equipment. And so there's any number of socioeconomic issues that are at play. There's also all the cultural issues that we find with regard to what's happening in the city because there's such a high level of immigrant populations in urban markets, and many of those parents of kids in urban environments are coming from cultures where it wasn't encouraged for women to participate in sport and physical activity, and it probably certainly wasn't encouraged for them to be public with their sexual orientation. And so you talk about having a couple of different wet blankets thrown on your ability to feel good about who you are as a young kid of color who might be struggling with their sexual identity. There's an awful lot there to overcome. So it's a good point that you bring up in regards to class and inclusion or exclusion.
Yes, would you come up? Yep.
I'm part of a large tennis organization in Seattle. Now, what I would love to take home is some specific suggestions from anybody as to how we might reach out, especially to the African American community. A couple of barriers that I personally feel. I know from my African American friends that being gay is just not easy. It's very tough. So that's one major issue that I don't know how to face. I feel closed off from that part. The other thing is privilege. Now, I didn't grow up taking tennis lessons all my life. I'd probably be in the semi-pros or something if I did. But I do know that we have really good programs in town that are teaching African American kids how to play tennis. I've seen them because I've taken instruction with them. There's actually black teachers, black instructors doing that in sports clubs sponsored by the city. So it's out there, but I don't know how to get in touch with it. I'd like to be able to reach out to people at various different age groups and try to make them aware that if they are a gay athlete out there, closeted or not, that we're here and we'd love to have them involved. Thanks.
Can I ask a question? Is your club a gay and lesbian club? Okay. Well, one of the ways that I would maybe think about it is how you can jointly sponsor some opportunities for people to get more exposure to what it is that you do. And it could be with other civic organizations in the city, whether they're gay or not. You know, I think sometimes people who either may be closeted or uneducated may feel like there's no place for them there, whether they're athletic or not. It may be because there needs to be more networking and outreach to other civic organizations in the city where you could tap into a built-in network of folks and make that connection. The other thing might be to sponsor sort of clinic with a high-profile athlete who may be gay and lesbian, but who's also a person of color, so that might be the attraction for others who can identify with that person to come and feel comfortable that there's somebody there that they can relate to, which may end up giving you exposure to folks that may not have thought about your organization before.
And if I can add to that, I think part of the challenge is making your club, and this would go for any organization that's trying to reach out to communities of color, comfortable, and accessible. And part of the challenge is that a lot of people of color do not primarily identify with their sexual orientation. They identify first with their race. And I know certainly for myself, that was true. I mean, only quite honestly in the last few years since moving to the Bay Area have I really started to focus in on my identity as a lesbian. And that has more to do with being where I am in San Francisco and having access to resources. But this is a challenge, I think, for all organizations. But just because it's a difficult challenge doesn't mean we shouldn't go after it. I mean, National Center for Lesbian Rights, which is I'm on the board of the directors. This is a huge thing for us. I mean, the perception around the country is that we're a middle class, upper class, white organization, which is, I believe, how we started. And it is difficult to get communities of color to see us as a resource, but we have dedicated kind of our efforts to doing that, and it's kind of trial and error. We're doing a lot of different things and seeing what works, and then building on the things that work and cutting out the things that don't, and just continue to brainstorm about how to make our organization accessible and comfortable. And I think that's for any organization, whether it's an organization like ours or an athletic organization like yours. That the key is to make it feel like a place where they are safe, where they are welcome, that they're not the only one, and it may, and some of that may even be geographical. I mean, I have no idea where you're located, but if you're not in their communities, asking people to come out of their communities to go into another community may not in itself be safe, So, I mean, it's complicated, but again, I stress that it's not going to be an easy task, and I think part of why it doesn't happen is because there are no easy answers to it. But I mean, that's our challenge, is to continue to look for ways to reach into these communities and become accessible and be welcoming and find a way to get them involved. So.
Can I just make a comment, Pat, before you say something? Because listening to this, And I'm always best when I speak about something that I know. And what I do know is how to deal with athletes, female athletes, elite female athletes, and how difficult that is to do. And I say this to touch on the whole role model situation, which I have been trying to use for the last 14, 15 years to get more girls and women involved in sports by using our elite athlete support system. I'm wondering if we can't kind of expand upon that and try to find some, and this I'm talking about finding a needle in a haystack, elite female athletes, okay, that's one level. Elite female athletes of color, now you're talking real challenge. But trying to find athletes in that category to act as role models for these young girls. Act as role models not only for young girls, but high school girls, college girls who are trying to make to try to break into the whole world of sports. Robin mentioned that she's kind of at a loss as to what to tell her Asian friends or athletes following in her footsteps about how to deal with what she had to go through. There's no textbook on this, guys. There's no textbook. And the only way that the girls and women out there are going to learn how to do this is from those who have already done it. And those who have already done it have to have a hook. They have to have something that's going to attract these girls to them, to want to listen, to want to come to the clinic. You know, Zena Garrison runs clinics. You know, she's not a lesbian, but you know what? She is lesbian friendly, as you saw or we'll see in the video. And there are other athletes out there like that. You know, I always say it's not what you say, it's how you say it. It's not how you approach them. It's not whether you approach them, but how you approach them. So I'm confident that there are athletes, elite athletes out there, who, if they're approached in the right way, will be willing to help by way of being a role model for these girls. That's just my observation.
I just wanted to add something to what Dora was saying about, because I have been in this situation so many times, probably many of us who are white in the room have, where you're in an organization and you want to do outreach to bring more people of color into the organization. I'm sure I see people nodding heads, so I see other people relate to that too. And it's about changing the organization. It's not just about bringing people in. It's about doing a racism education with individuals, but it's also about, as Dora was saying, changing the structures and the policies. It's becoming a new organization. It really is nothing less than that. And so if we only look at how can we bring people into this organization that's already in existence, I think it's the wrong question. I think the question is, how do we become a different organization? It is a place that's welcoming and inviting for people.
This is just speaking to the notion of role models, and it's you, Yolanda, I think. In terms of, and relates to you, Robin, I think, role models, I'm thinking that you also work with American industry, and the concept of asking American industry to step up to the plate, as it were, in that, for instance, when Michelle Kwan wins a medal, she's not snapped up by the advertising media versus Nancy Kerrigan, who's a so-so athlete, you know, that happened to get bashed, and boom, she's all over everything. And so the question is, it's like, you know, it's sort of the white media is also just saying, well, we're not going to take any chances, we're just going to use this athlete, she's safe, versus expanding it. I don't know how much arm twisting you ever get to do, but, you know.
You know, that's a real good point, and that was also the situation, 5, 6, 7 years ago with the Williams girls. They were totally left out of the media unless it was something having to do with Richard Williams, their father, and his behavior. They were, you know, skinny, you know, braces on their teeth, pigtails, you know, and not very photogenic. And I followed both of them from the time they were like 9 and 11. And I followed the media coverage of them of that time. And nothing happened positive for them until they started kicking butt on the court. And then there were problems with that. You know, there were all kinds of reasons for why they were so good or why they weren't as good or why the fans were behind them or not behind them. And they, too, had some controversy in the locker room with other players because they were kicking butt. So yeah, I have to arm twist not only the industry, but sometimes agents. I deal with them on a regular basis, and I deal with them on different levels and different issues. And I've had to educate them on who I will use and who I won't, and why I will or will not use their athletes. I have made a lot of enemies in the management community because I've come right out and said, unless you do a better job in representing your athletes or in selecting certain athletes to promote, I will not deal with you. So, of course, that kind of gives them pause because the foundation is becoming to be a little bit more popular, a little bit more familiar in the media. And our programs and our sponsorships are becoming more and more visible, more and more credible. And so access to these kinds of sponsorships for their athletes is becoming very important. So they don't want to mess with that. So it's the whole money thing. So we educate the agents, we educate the athletes. In some cases, we educate the athletes' parents, their siblings. I am not beyond going over an agent's head and talking to Michelle Kwan's mother. I've done that. So it's getting access, getting in there, talking to them. You talk to an elite female athlete, you really get to understand what's important to them. And what's important to them is a better world for those coming up behind them. And a better world is an accepting world. So starting from that premise, there's a whole lot of folks out there that will be willing to help if, again, approached in the right way.
And actually, I wanted to add to something both Peter and Yolanda said about in trying to create role models or to draw people into the organizations that you have. Particularly with communities of color, I would say you'd have more of an impact bringing in a straight person of color than trying to find a lesbian or gay person who they can relate to. Because again, if you go back to the basic premise that around communities of color, the primary identity is race and not so much the sexual orientation, that if you can get someone who may be straight but certainly friendly in helping people feel good about that person and who they are fundamentally on a race level is like a building block to allowing the person to feel better about themselves on a level in terms of sexual orientation. And an example of that, like for me, is my biggest ally when I was at UCLA my first year, which was incredibly difficult, was Jackie Joyner. She was on the basketball team. She was our team captain, and she was a senior, had just finished the '84 Olympics. And when all this stuff came out around my sexual orientation, as well as all the things that were happening to me around race with the coaches, Jackie was the first one to step up and say, I don't care who you sleep with, and I know what they're doing to you is unfair, and just kind of sat there and said, but I'm going to help you get through this because I do not want you to leave the school. And she's the one who stayed there, and every day it became like I got through practices because Jackie was the one. It's like me and you. It's like we're the only ones out here, and I'm going to help you get through this until you're strong enough to get through it yourself. And that was huge for me. And I do believe that if she were not there to help me through that I would have left. I had other schools that were more than happy to have me go to their schools, and I probably would have faced very different things. But it had been like a dream of mine to go to UCLA, and Jackie helped me do that. And so I guess I offer this as another kind of option to, finding the role model, the black or person of color role model is in itself going to be hard to get them in, but then trying to also complicate that by adding a gay person. You may not happen, and it may not be necessary at this point. I guess is the point I'm trying to make, is that it may be as Peter suggested, bringing in an athlete, a tennis player, a male tennis player, African American or whatever the ethnicity is, that they can relate to, that may be sufficient enough, because again, where people relate is more on the level of race initially, and then sexual orientation comes later.
I just thought that's in terms of the media's depiction of women athletes in general, trying to feminize them make them objects of sexual interest as opposed to real athletic talent. Well, there had been athletes that were 16 and 17, 15 playing on a tennis tour and a golf tour long before the run. But the media didn't seem to have a problem with that. But when they become young black males making $90 million before they ever play a game, there's more of an issue with it. So I asked the media to just consider whether that was part of why they seemed to think it was such a big story. And then the other example is Anna Kournikova. I mean, Anna Kournikova has never won a tournament. Not one, not ever. And think about all the media attention that Anna Kournikova has received over the years. Now, let me ask you a question. If Anna Kournikova was openly gay, would we be hearing all we've heard about Anna Kournikova? Would she still be depicted as a sex object if she had come out and said she was gay? And we all know the answer to that. So you have to think about who are the people behind the media, who are the people in corporate America that are making some of the decisions they make about who they promote.
There's another question I think down here. Oh, sorry. I think well, you know what? I don't know. Where's Max?
10 minutes? Oh, okay, 2 minutes. I was simply going to add to the comments that actually all of you have made, sort of generalize them, is that one of the things we're looking at is that, once again, sport is not leading the way in this field. I know we like to think often that sport is this equal playing field and that it's a meritorious opportunity where everybody's given the same advantage, but it's not. Once again, sport is dragging its heels. This is really symptomatic of the larger culture, which is we're still in a racist society in which white people receive all the privilege, and until the privilege that we receive as white people, things aren't going to change. So again, the focus on racism, just like on homophobia, needs to shift from a victimization of gays and lesbians for homophobia to a victimization of society as a whole under a racist culture. Once our society starts to lower, once levels of racism start to lower, then we're going to see more athletes of color starting to come out in sport. But right now, they're not there. There's one openly gay black professional athlete, and he quickly recounted, probably because he wasn't out to his family before he came out in genre. And I'm not aware of any professional athletes of color in any other sport. So it's a huge problem, and I think your point was perfect. You're probably not going to find an athlete of color to come talk to your organization. It's going to be hard to do. But if you can find some athletes of color, period, to join, then that's a great start. So I just kind of wanted to wrap up those conversations.
Thank you very much. One more? We get one more? Just one more. Okay.
This will be really quick. I just want to follow up on something Robin said, or actually ask you a question. You mentioned that your coach was paralyzed, and I was wondering what you meant by that. Were the coach's hands tied by administration? Was your coach just unable personally to deal with the situation?
We had a really difficult year that year. We had a coach who had a relationship with one of the team players, and the original coach had lost her immigration status. So there were a number of things going on, and I think when I had brought up with her my feelings about being invisible or being silenced, she's like, well, I'll talk to the players. And it never got better. And I think she thought that she could handle it. And I think she thought that, it was a simple problem that could be easily resolved. And I don't think she realized how large or huge it was. And by the time she realized that, it was too late. And I think that, I felt paralysis on her part because I didn't see anything happen. And I just think that it's not something that you can mess around with. The minute you hear something like that goes on, you have to immediately take action, and you have to follow up and make sure that things get resolved, and that if they're not, then take the next level of action. And I think that's why I had described it as that, because nothing had really happened, even though she had made sort of minor attempts to follow up. There were all these other things going on, and it just got kind of lost.
I personally would like to see this topic repeated next year at the conference, and hopefully we can get a little bit more time to bring out some of the different issues that were brought up. And, of course, now I'm kind of an event-driven person. I would also like to see more people of color and see how and maybe get the event promoted in the communities where we could get the attendance of these folks of color at this. I think it's important for everyone concerned to have that interaction from the majority of the individuals that this is being focused to. So I hope the organizers could help do a little better job in promoting the event to those folks. Thanks so much, and we'll be very happy to come back next year if I'm invited. Thank you, everyone.